Hello, and welcome to my reading of the Germonic Scriptures um, from Final Fantasy Tactics Rebirth. So the Germonic Scriptures, well, at least the text that we can, or that you can view in the game if you press triangle here, is a pretty crucial part of the story of Final Fantasy Tactics, but the original translation is really bad, so I'm going to be reading from Sugnuf's translation of the game text, from 2007, and this translation was released just shortly before the War of the Lions, or the PSP version of the game, was released. And Sugnuf, in his introduction to the translation, which I have linked in the notes or the description of this video, and I suggest you read along to the on the section that I'm going to read. Sugnuf says that he actually was working on translating the text of the game for about 4 years, and then he was kind of rushed into releasing his translation by the impending release of the PSP version of the game. So, he thought that the PSP translation would be better than his own, and so he just wanted to get something out there and into people's hands before his work was all kind of rendered obsolete by the release of the PSP game. But for our purposes, it will do quite well because it includes all the information that's in this text here in a clear way, and the translation is really not so bad. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and read the text. It starts with Ramsa's thoughts on reading the scripture of Germonic. I picked up the book of Germonic, which Father Simon entrusted to me, and flipped through its pages. It was written in the language of Majora's time, the holy tongue of old. Though there were illustrations here and there, the text was damaged and the words difficult to discern. I wondered to myself, what could these tattered pages contain? It was in the midst of that thought that I noticed something more. There were notes in Illusion written throughout the book. Who offered these? Judging from the ink, the oldest of the notes were several years old, but some of the newest might have been penned mere days ago. The ink had not completely dried, and the letters smudged a little when I rubbed them. And all were done in the same hand. I realized it must have been Father Simon. He must have been translating the book bit by bit over the years, annotating as he worked. I tried reading Germonic's book using Father Simon's scattered writings. The first passage read something along the lines of, an account written by Germonic, disciple of Ajora. Germonic? I have heard that name before, maybe in history class? It came to me. Germonic was the disciple who sold out his teacher, Saint Ajora, to the Holy Eudora Empire. It was amazing that a book written by him was still in existence. I barely suppressed my excitement as I turned the page, but what I discovered there was even more shocking than the mere possession of this ancient legacy. My first thoughts had been that Germonic's book was simply another compilation of Saint Ajora's words and teachings, but how naive I was. Germonic had indeed made a record of Saint Ajora's activities, but not the Ajora whom we know, but of Ajora of the Hume, one amongst many of his time. I do not share the same depth of faith as my brother Zalbag, but I do believe that Saint Ajora was the Son of God, sent from heaven to save humankind from chaos and destruction. Rather, I should say I did believe until I read this book. Unto a golden age, when great airships sailed the skies, was born Saint Ajora in Pervenia of Lassalia. In his youth, Saint Ajora walked to a well and said, Woe shall soon befall this land. Let us seal this well, so that none may drink from its waters, for calamity will issue from it. Days later, the Black Plague struck Pervenia. Those who drank the tainted water died without exception. Families who believed him remained healthy and survived. Then on, people revered him as a child of miracles and as the Son of God. And when he came unto his 20th year, he would further become known as the Savior. Long ago, before Ivalice was united as it is now, The land was divided into the 7 kingdoms of Zeltenia, Ovoham, Leonel, Limbury, Lasalia, Elion, and Morond. These 7 kingdoms waged war incessant against one another in their efforts to expand. After centuries of conflict, an ambitious young king was born in Morond. Though he led an army large enough to conquer all of Ivalice, the path to victory was difficult and uncertain. Therefore, using secrets gleaned from an ancient tome, the king summoned forth a powerful demon and attempted to harness its might. But alas, the demon killed the king and tried to destroy the world. However, a group of 12 courageous individuals collected the Zodiac stones scattered throughout the land and used them to call forth the Zodiac Braves. The Braves defeated the demon and its minions and banished it back to its own realm. 12 were praised as saviors of the world. This is the well-known Zodiac Brave story. Ever since, whenever evil threatens, the Braves appear to save the world and then to disappear again. Saint Ajora was alive, similar events occurred. The king of Limbury wished to unite Ivalice as the king of Morond had wished before him, and so he too summoned a powerful demon. Ivalice once again fell into chaos. Legend says that this time it was Saint Ajora who collected the 12 Zodiac stones and called upon the Zodiac Braves to banish the demon. But to many men of power in his time, Saint Ajora was less a hero than a troublesome upstart. The Holy Eudora Empire feared Ajora's growing influence and his preachings of the arrival of the Kingdom of God. Priests of the Fara faith, the dominant religion of the time, were especially afraid of Saint Ajora's rising popularity. Ultimately, for the sake of money, Saint Ajora's whereabouts were betrayed to the Empire and the priests of Fara by his 13th disciple Germonik. Saint Ajora was captured and executed at Golgorarda. But Saint Ajora was the son of God, and so the priests of Fara faced the wrath of the god himself. Immediately following Ajora's death, a host of natural disasters struck Morond, the center of the Fara faith, and sank most of it into the sea. As for Saint Ajora, he was welcomed into heaven as the Son of God. He forever seated at the right hand of the divine. This is the tale all Evolutians know, and what I knew before reading the book, but the Book of Germonik describes a complete stranger. The Ajora of the book was not the Son of God. He was a Hume just as we are. He was a man of ambition who fought to fulfill his own goals and dreams, not a brave, peace-loving person who risked his life for the sake of others. This is Ajora as Germonik describes him. As the founder of a new and rapidly growing religion, Ajora was no mere nuisance to the Empire. But even then, the face of the prophet was not Ajora's only identity. Ajora was an agent of the Empire's enemies, sent to brew anarchy and collect information. In short, a spy. Ajora frightened the Empire. Ajora sent Germonik to monitor Ajora's activities, and to retrieve evidence to prove whether Ajora was truly a spy or not. According to Germonik, Ajora apparently truly had been trying to collect the Holy Stones. Germonik himself confirmed the discovery of a few, but one must ask why. I am unsure if the young king of Limbury had really attempted to summon a demon. Nothing is written about that in the book. However, it is a fact that Morond met with great calamity, and half of it sank into the sea at the time of Ajora's death. Father Simon's notes at this point in the book were the most interesting. They appeared to reflect his personal thoughts. Despite rumors of its existence, none before me have ever seen the Book of Germonik. Does this book contain truth, or fabrications designed to blacken the achievements of Saint Ajora? I believe that I know. Back in my days as an inquisitor of the Church, many of my fellow inquisitors from time to time showed discomfort at the idea that this book should become known to the world. Pope most likely felt the same way. For this reason, I believe the book to be true. After Ajora's death, the Church sought to gain power by drawing upon his legacy. Thus, they unified Saint Ajora with God, and preached his divinity. To do that, all of his errors and mistakes and crimes had to be deleted from history. Saint Ajora had to become the Son of God. In their genius, they even adopted into their doctrine the widely believed Zodiac Brave story of the era. It was easy to fool the people of Ivalis into believing that Saint Ajora had led the Zodiac Braves to victory over a fictitious demon summoned into our world. When I read this book, I lost my faith, but I felt no sadness in my heart, for it was awash with a newfound thirst for truth. But at the same time, I committed a grievous crime. I knew the church deceived the people of Ivalis, but I kept my silence. Why? Because if I brought the book to light, they would have taken the library away from me. It would have crushed me to lose the library, because it was all that could sate my curiosity. I lost the battle against my own greed for knowledge. Father Simon said that the demon of legend was a lie, but having witnessed the terrible power of the stones, I suspect that this conspiracy engulfing my life was not simply the design of the Pope, but that of a far more sinister person. That of far more sinister persons. So that is the text. Just a few things to say about it. The first is that I think it could be maybe a bit of a, or the idea of it could be inspired by the Dead Sea Scrolls. You know, this idea of apocryphal texts about the life of Jesus, or in this case, the life of Saint Ajora, that were not included in the Bible or in the official teachings of the church by the church fathers. So, you know, that might be where Matsuno got the idea to include this major plot point of the Germonic Scriptures. Aside from that, the church in Ivalis, the church in FFT, seems to be quite clearly modeled on Catholic Church, and we can tell this from a number of different things. Well, to begin with, they have inquisitors, just like the Catholic Church had inquisitors, or, you know, in some sense they still have the Inquisition. I believe it's called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, although they don't do any of the nasty stuff that the used to do during various rough periods in history at this point in time. And there are other things. For example, Ajora is betrayed by one of his disciples. He is killed by a certain empire at the encouragement of a old faith, the Farah faith here, which could be read as the stand-in for the Jews, who are said to have encouraged the Romans to have killed Jesus. And aside from that, well, Ajora is considered to be the Son of God, and there's also this point about the early church integrating the Zodiac Brave story into the story about Ajora, and that is probably a reference to what the early Catholic Church did, or, you know, the early Christian Church did in adopting certain pagan tropes or pagan cults into the church as part of its strategy for expansion. And, you know, the early church fathers here can kind of stand in to some extent for the figure of Saint Paul, who actually formalized Christianity into an institutionalized religion. And then, you know, the subsequent church fathers and church priests who went out into the world and proselytized and you know, integrated a lot of pagan festivals and all that sort of thing into the activities of the Catholic Church. So the analogy to Christianity, or the reference to Christianity, is very, very clear, I think. there is a little bit of an issue with this because at the beginning of the game, I said that, you know, in that scene with Ovelia praying in the monastery chapel, she says, "Oh God," but in the actual Japanese text, it says "kamigami," which means gods. It's explicitly pluralized, but there's very, very little evidence in the game aside from that this church is actually a polytheistic church. If you look at a similar case, which is the Faith of the Seven in George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, you can see that he's much more explicit about making it polytheistic. He kind of takes some of the institutional aspects of the Catholic Church and some of the polytheistic aspects of Catholicism, namely like the cult of the saints and the Trinitarianism, and turns that into a pantheon of seven divinities that people worship in this Church of the Seven. So it's very explicitly polytheistic and obviously polytheistic, but in this game, in Final Fantasy Tactics, we only really see the figure of Ajora and the figure of God, and there's no obvious polytheistic references anywhere else in the game. So I think it's fairly easy to say that the religion here is actually a monotheistic one, or if you want to really split hairs, you could say it's kind of polytheistic only in the sense that Ajora is considered to be the son of God and one with God. But I don't really want to talk about the various debates about heresies and Unitarianism and all that other kind of stuff, because I don't think it's really pertinent to the game in any way. The only other thing I wanted to mention is kind of about the critique of religion in this game. I think you can say that there are many Japanese RPGs that criticize religion, and probably you could say criticize Christianity explicitly, or almost explicitly, where they have some evil church that's trying to take over the world, and the monotheistic god that all the church members are worshiping is actually some kind of horrible demon, or it's all just a big scam, or whatever. The church is almost always portrayed as warmongering, intolerant, fanatical, extremely hierarchical, oppressive, unnatural, out of touch with people's common experience in life, immoral, hypocritical, duplicitous, list goes on and on and on. The criticism is usually very strong, and when I was young, for me and my friends, I guess all of us pretty much were, I guess you could say, at least agnostic, if not atheistic. I don't know, that was just part of the environment that was around me when I was growing up in Canada. We kind of liked these games because we liked the criticism of Christianity, because I think a lot of our parents had actually grown up Christian and had left the church because of hypocrisies that they perceived in the doctrines of the church and the actions of the church, or in whatever Christian denomination they belonged to. In my case, my family was Catholic, and my parents basically left the church because of the scandals in the Catholic Church. But this kind of irreligiosity was very common among all of us, and we kind of liked these JRPGs because they were one of the few mass media works that consistently criticize organized religion and criticize Christianity. So there's a little bit of a rebel spirit that we saw in them. But as I've grown up, and the more JRPGs I've played, and the more I've thought about this, and I guess the longer I've lived in Japan, the more I realize that we really misinterpreted what they were trying to say. There is some of that criticism of religion in there that I guess you could say is inspired by the sort of things we were thinking as kids, right? Like the criticism of religion that comes out of like Feuerbach and Marx, right? That whole German tradition of atheism, or pantheism, I guess you could say in some cases, where religion is the opiate of the masses, and so on and so on. I think there's also an element in these JRPGs that is about the New Age kind of criticism of organized religion, right? The return to paganism. And I think that in the case of Japan, or these JRPGs, the New Age argument is a rather easy argument to make. Because, there's already a actual quote-unquote pagan religion that exists here in Japan, Shinto, and it's very closely tied to people's everyday life, their rituals growing up, the lives of their communities, the festivals they have, all that kind of thing. And it's accepted as a norm socially to participate in this religion, and you don't really have to take a strong critical stance to believe in this kind of New Age perspective when the paganism is already all around you and is just a thing that is happening everywhere. So I think that element is a lot stronger in most of these JRPGs, right? Like, going back to, say, games like Breath of Fire 2, but even more so games like Final Fantasy X, where Yuna is this kind of Shinto priestess, right? And she has this shamanistic character, and she works with the spirits and all that kind of thing. And it's all pretty consistent with the religious practices of Shinto in Japan. So I think that what I'm trying to say here is that I think for many people who played these games, they saw in them the kind of Feuerbachian criticism of religion, but I think that in Final Fantasy X or in a lot of the Tales games, where it's really coming from is a lot of New Age kind of thinking, and also just kind of a defense of Shintoism against monotheism, right? Like, Japan is the country where Christianity never really caught on. It was kind of pushed out, and it just exists as a kind of residue or a minor cult here. In a sense, these games are just a reflection of the prevailing attitude in Japan. So it's interesting how they can be interpreted in one way in another country, and then interpreted just as well. This is just kind of the way people think in general here in Japan by the Japanese. I think what I would say is that it makes me lose a little bit of respect for these games and these criticisms, and that may be just unfair. And I'm not being understanding enough of the perspective that these people are coming from, but they lose a little bit of that rebel edge when they're actually just supporting the dominant religious beliefs of the country, right? and their kind of extreme criticism of Christianity, without seeing any of the positive impact or positive aspects of its universalism, its belief in equality, the work of people like the Quakers or the Anabaptists or the liberation theologists or any of that kind of thing, and just this completely one-sided rejection of Christianity seems a little bit less ambitious and critical and rebel and interesting once you understand the context. So that's kind of all I have to say about that. But as for Final Fantasy Tactics and the specific criticisms of religion in this game, we will talk about it a bit more as it goes on and try to kind of pick apart the specific nuances of what Matsuno is trying to say about organized religion and about the whole relationship between monotheism, religious authority, and polytheism. So if you enjoyed that long rambling speech, please like and subscribe. I don't think there'll be another one until maybe the very end of the game. But I certainly will continue to analyze the plot and continue to play the game. So a new video will probably be uploaded tomorrow, and I hope you will watch that one as well.